You know that feeling when you walk into a room and within 5 minutes you can tell you're the wrong frequency. Not wrong like rude. Not wrong like you said something offensive, just wrong. You say something true, something simple, something you thought was obvious, and the air changes. Someone checks their phone. Someone laughs a little too loud at nothing. The conversation pivots hard into weather, into renovations, into anything but what you just said. And later, if you're unlucky, someone pulls you aside. You're so serious. You're kind of intense, you know? Or the worst one, the one that lands like a diagnosis. You're boring. Boring. Not unintelligent. Not unkind. Boring. As if the problem is that you don't sparkle enough. Don't perform enough. Don't disappear into the noise enough. And here's the thing that makes it worse. You start wondering if they're right. Maybe you are too much or not enough. Maybe you should have laughed at that joke you didn't find funny. Maybe you should have pretended the conversation about nothing was about something. Maybe you should have worn the mask better. Because that's what it feels like, right? Like everyone got a script and you missed rehearsal. Jung saw this, not in those words, but he saw it. He called it the tension between the individual and the collective, between your actual face and the face the group needs you to wear. And here's what he understood that most people don't. The collective doesn't just prefer the mask, it is it. Because the moment you stop performing, the moment you stop pretending the emperor's clothes are beautiful, you become a problem. Not because you're wrong, because you're awake. And awake people make sleeping people nervous. I'm not talking about being smarter than everyone. That's not what this is. I'm talking about the woman at the dinner party who says, I don't think I believe that anymore. When someone repeats the same tired opinion everyone's been agreeing with for 20 years. I'm talking about the man who doesn't laugh when the group laughs. Not because he's judging them, but because the joke wasn't funny and he doesn't know how to fake it anymore. I'm talking about the person who answers, how are you, honestly? Just once, and watches the Askar's face freeze. You're not boring. You're lucid, and lucidity, in a room full of people who've agreed not to see, feels like a threat. Because if you can see through it, then maybe they can too, and that's the last thing anyone wants to know. So, what is lucidity? Really? Because I think we confuse it with intelligence, or with having opinions, or with being woke in whatever direction that word points this year. But it's none of that. Lucidity is simpler and harder. Lucidity is the ability to see what's actually happening while it's happening, not later, not in therapy 3 years down the line when you finally connect the dots. Now, in the room, in the conversation, in the middle of the performance everyone's giving, you see the gap between what people are saying and what's actually going on, between the smile and the exhaustion behind it, between the confidence and the terror holding it up, between the consensus and the quiet truth no one's saying. And once you see that gap, you can't unsee it. That's the thing about lucidity. It's not a skill you turn on and off. It's not a lens you pick up when it's convenient. It's a shift in vision that doesn't reverse. Jung would call this awareness of the shadow. Not just your shadow, the collective shadow. The things a group agrees not to look at so it can function. And here's why. That's threatening, because every group, every family, every workplace, every circle of friends runs on a set of unspoken agreements. We don't talk about that. We don't question this. We all pretend we believe in X, even though nobody really does. These agreements aren't malicious. Most of the time, they're just protective. They keep things smooth, predictable, safe. But they only work if everyone plays along. You know what happens in a restaurant when one person says, "I think this fish is bad"? Everyone else at the table suddenly has to decide, do I admit I thought so too? Or do I keep eating and pretend everything's fine? Most people keep eating. Not because the fish is good, because agreement is easier than truth. When you're lucid, you're the person who said the fish is bad. And it doesn't matter if you said it kindly. It doesn't matter if you whispered it. It doesn't matter if you tried to laugh it off. You named the thing, and now everyone has to choose. Admit they see it too, or exile you for breaking the spell. Jung understood this in his own life. Freud had built this brilliant, fragile structure, psychoanalysis, a whole system, a whole language, a movement. And Jung looked at it and said, I don't think the libido explains everything. Not as an attack, just as an observation, just lucidity. And Freud never forgave him, because lucidity in a system that requires belief feels like betrayal. The herd doesn't hate you because you're smarter. It hates you because you're present, fully present, not performing, not pretending, not floating along in a shared dream. You're here, and that makes everyone else realize they're not. There's a reason why, in groups, the person who's actually listening is the one who makes people uncomfortable, not the one talking the most, not the one with the loudest laugh, the one who's there, looking at you, hearing you, not waiting for their turn to speak, just present. It's unnerving, because most of us aren't present. Most of the time, we're performing presence. We're doing the dance of engagement without actually engaging. And when someone shows up who isn't dancing, the whole room feels it. Jung called this the persona, the mask you wear to survive the collective. And he didn't say the persona was bad. He said it was necessary. You need it. I need it. We all need it to move through the world without getting torn apart. But he also said this: if you become the mouse, if you forget, there's a face underneath. You're not living, you're performing life. And the lucid person in the room, the boring one, is the only one who reminds you that you're performing. Just by not performing, that's the threat, not what you say. What you are? Here's what nobody wants to admit. The herd needs the fog. Not because people are stupid, not because they're weak, because consciousness is expensive. Think about it. If you actually saw clearly what was happening in your marriage, your job, your friendships, your country, every single day, you'd have to do something about it, or live with the fact that you're not doing something about it. And that second option, that's unbearable. So most people choose a third option. They don't look. Jung talked about this as psychic economy. You can't hold everything in awareness at once. Your psyche would collapse under the weight. So you pick what you can afford to see, and you let the rest dissolve into the background, into the unconscious. And that's fine. That's healthy. That's survival. But here's the twist. The collective does the same thing. Groups, families, churches, nations, friend circles, they also can't hold everything in awareness. So they make collective agreements about what gets seen. and what stays in the fog. We see this. We celebrate this. We talk about this. We do not see that. We do not name that. That stays quiet. And it works, as long as everyone agrees. But then you walk in, and you're not trying to cause trouble. You're not trying to be a rebel or a whistleblower or the person who ruins Thanksgiving. You're just awake. And because you're awake, you see the thing that's in the fog, and because you see it, you assume everyone else does too, so you mention it. Casually, innocently, like it's obvious. And the room goes cold, because you just named the thing everyone agreed not to name. You're not boring. You're a mirror, and nobody asked you to hold up that mirror. Here's an example. You're at a family gathering. Everyone's talking about how well someone's doing. New job, new house, everything's great. And you say, not even harshly, just as an observation, yeah, but he seems tired. Like really tired. Silence. Someone changes the subject. Later, someone tells you you're negative. But you weren't being negative. You were being accurate. You saw the exhaustion everyone else was working very hard not to see. Because if they saw it, they'd have to ask why. They'd have to wonder if success is supposed to feel like that. They'd have to question the whole story they've been telling themselves about what a good life looks like. And that's too much. So instead, you're the problem. You're the downer, the boring one, the person who takes things too seriously. Jung saw this his whole career. People would come to him with a problem, a symptom, anxiety, depression, insomnia, rage, and he'd say, let's look at your life. Let's look at what you're actually doing, how you're actually living. And half the time, they'd leave. Not because he was wrong, because he was right. And they weren't ready to see it. The herd doesn't want clarity. It wants comfort. And comfort requires a shared blindness. A collective agreement to not look too closely. To not ask too many questions. To keep the story intact. And you walked in without the agreement. You're looking. And worse, you're saying what you see. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes with this. It's not the loneliness of being disliked. It's the loneliness of being unintelligible. You say something true, something clear, something that feels to you like the most obvious thing in the world. And people look at you like you just spoke another language. Not because they don't understand the words, because they've chosen not to understand. And you can make someone see what they've decided not to see. You just can. Jung said, the unconscious isn't just personal. It's collective. There are things whole cultures agree not to know. Whole generations that choose fog oversight. And if you're the one person in the room who refuses the fog, you're not going to be celebrated. You're going to be tolerated. At best, because here's the deep truth. You're not reflecting them. You're reflecting the gap between who they are and who they're pretending to be. Between what they know and what they're pretending not to know. And that gap, that's where the shame lives. That's where the fear lives. And nobody wants to look at that. So they look at you instead and call you boring. So here's the part nobody tells you. Once you see clearly, you can't go back. You can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. You can't climb back into the comfortable fog and pretend everything's fine. Your nervous system won't let you. And that's the price. Not rejection. Not being called boring. not even the loneliness. The price is you're awake in a world that's still sleeping, and you have to live there every day. Knowing what you know, seeing what you see, while everyone around you continues the performance. Jung lived this. After the break with Freud, after he started going his own way, he spent years in what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. He was alone, not because people abandoned him, because he couldn't pretend anymore. He couldn't go back to the shared language, the shared assumptions, the safety of the collective agreement. He'd seen too much, and it almost destroyed him. But here's what he learned, and this is important. The loneliness isn't a bug, it's a feature, because individuation, becoming who you actually are instead of who the collective needs you to be, requires separation, not forever, not as punishment, but as passage. You have to leave the herd to find yourself, and most people never do it. Not because they're cowards, because the cost is too high. The herd offers something real: safety, belonging, the comfort of shared blindness. And when you step out of that, you're on your own. There's a specific kind of silence that comes with lucidity. It's not the silence of having nothing to say. It's the silence of knowing that what you'd say wouldn't land. So you'll stop saying it, not because you're afraid, because you're tired. Tired of being the mirror. Tired of watching people flinch. Tired of the look on their faces when you name the thing they've spent years not naming. So you go quiet, and people think you're boring, but you're not boring. You're just alone with what you see. And here's the thing Jung understood: that aloneness, that separation from the herd, it's not the end, it's the beginning. Because once you're out of the collective fog, once you're no longer performing, once you've stopped pretending, you finally have space to ask, who am I? Not who they need me to be, not who I'm supposed to be. Who am I, actually? And that question, that's the whole game. That's individuation. That's the thing Jung spent his entire life trying to point people toward. Not happiness, not success, not even peace. But, Jung says, the terrifying, liberating experience of being the person you actually are. Most people never get there, because most people can't survive the loneliness that comes before it. They step out of the herd for a minute, feel the cold, and step right back in. And I don't blame them. I really don't. Because it is cold out here. But if you're someone who can't go back, if you're someone who's tried to put the mask back on and it doesn't fit anymore, if you're someone who's been called boring, or too serious, or too intense, or too much, then maybe, just maybe, you're not the problem. Maybe you're just further along the path than the people around you. And the loneliness you feel isn't failure. It's proof that you're becoming real. Jung said this, and I think about it all the time. Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. And that's it, isn't it? You're not lonely because you're alone. You're lonely because you're awake, and the people around you, the ones calling you boring, the ones who can't quite meet your eyes, they're still asleep, and you can't wake them. You can only live your own wakefulness and wait for the others who've left the herd too. They're out there, fewer than you'd hope, but they're out there And when you find them, you'll know, because you won't have to perform. You won't have to pretend. You won't have to shrink or explain or apologize for seeing clearly. You'll just be. And they'll just be. And for the first time in a long time, you won't be boring. You'll be seen. And that's worth the loneliness.